Yes, good afternoon here with the topic of AI-enabled developers. So I'll explain a little bit about what that is in a few seconds, but I will first like to welcome our guest this afternoon, Kristian Dupon. I've known Kristian I've known you a long time. I would almost say the entire professional life I've had.
Pretty
And
close.
pretty close. And I found one quote I think you wrote somewhere. I write code and I help others write code. And
Right. Yes.
whenever I think of you, you're writing code.
Thank you.
Besides that, you also you're founder of many companies, a co-founder, and you also have written an open source component that is also being used out there. So I would say
Yep.
whenever I have a question about code, I ask you.
Right.
So I don't know if you can add anything to the presentation of yourself here.
No, so the topic today is about using AI for development, and I should make the disclaimer that I'm no kind of expert in that particular area. I use it like I think probably most developers do these days, and I'm very fascinated by it, and I'm interested in it, and so I can share my experiences and thoughts. That's as far as I can promise to go today.
Yeah. And boy, I have a lot of questions. So let's see where we get, because I'm so interested in AI these days. And the reason for that, I'll also explain a little bit about before we dive into the questions. Because we in our company we work with agile teams for a very long time. So we know the basic agile team. Perhaps they have a product owner, a developer, perhaps also a tester or a UXer, and even also a scrum master. But what happens when we put AI into this picture? So how are we going to use AI not just individually, but in a full agile team? So that's what we are exploring with many of these meetups during the autumn here, finishing with the last we have in November about a full AI-enabled team. But today we're just focusing mainly on the developer role and exploring what is the responsibilities of that role. And that's where you come into the picture. We have also described a few principles about working with AI. So I'll just briefly explain those. It's to use this AI everywhere. So whenever we meet a task or something we do, we can use AI to try it out, to improve our knowledge about it and see if it can help. But we also want human in the loop. So it's not just AI spitting out code, you could say, and developing a lot of features, but we have to stay in the loop in order to ensure that it's correct and it's valid and so forth. So we treat AI as a person also, like a new team member, perhaps with a little bit of knowledge and some good input, but of course we also have to be critical about what these new AI agents could give us. And be responsible is about being responsible about using this AI. So we cannot just use it without thinking about, is it really okay to use it here? So that's kind of the basic principle we try to follow in all of this. I don't know if you can relate to any of this.
Yeah, that sounds relatable. There's a lot of new considerations and a lot of questions that we don't necessarily have the answers to yet. And also AI is evolving very, very, very fast. So even if we may have an answer to some of those questions, that can change in the next month or so. So it's a very dynamic field.
Yes. So let's dive into the questions here. So I have some topics here we will go through, and you have to tell me if, what do you think about this? The good thing about you is that you always have some kind of attitude or opinion about things,
Right.
especially about code.
Yeah.
So the first thing here is to can AI generate code? What do you say?
Yes, it can.
And how?
I
I
think
mean, yeah.
very few people will say that it cannot. I I'm an avid reader of this forum called Hacker News, which you may know about. And if you go onto that, you will frequently see people saying that AI is not good enough to generate any useful code. But I really find it hard to believe that anyone has tried using it can make that claim, because it is very, very good. It's better than most junior developers at writing code. There are some caveats, so it's not very good. It excels in certain languages and it excels in certain domains. So the domain that I'm working in, web development, TypeScript, and Python, it is really good at. I'm sure if you ask it to write some more esoteric languages and more specific fields, it will perform less well. I can't speak to that, but at least for what I'm doing, it's impossible to say that it cannot generate code.
And you've probably also written some pretty complex code throughout the years. So would you also say that you could kind of get it to write really complex code?
There are multiple kinds of complexity, right? So if you are thinking in terms of like algorithmic complexity, figuring out how is some piece of code, like a sorting algorithm or something, if you were to write something like that, which may be code that is complex, but not necessarily covering many files and many folders and so on, then it does very well at it. If you are talking about the complexity that arises when you have a large code base, because there's just a lot of stuff to keep in your head at once, then it is currently not very good.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Can we use it for code review? Can it find errors? Can it help us create clean and readable code? What do you think?
Yeah, I can do that. It currently it's best at finding generic errors. So if you're doing something that is an obvious, well, I mean, obvious to some, but maybe not to the one who wrote the code. And I think we've all done that. But you write something where there's a one-off error, or something you call a known encryption library in a way that is insecure or something like that. It can spot things like that. But in a similar vein to what I said before, as it currently doesn't tend to know the entire repository very well, it may not be able to spot errors that are arising because you are misusing another part of your code in a way that you're not supposed to, which is probably the majority of errors that we tend to make at this point. But that's not to say that it's all. Like it may be 60% or 70% or something like that. So there's still a good chunk of more simple errors that it can spot quite well.
So could we say it also needs more context? So it needs to know the entire code base to make.
Yeah. So that is the next step, for which a plethora of companies are trying to fix right now, right? So if you use something like GitHub Copilot or Cursor or even ChatGPT or Claude, and you paste in code, it will have a little context window. You can tell it, this is what I'm working with right now. And then it will know about that bit of code. And then it will know like the whole entire internet in a sense of like general purpose knowledge. But that's still not necessarily what you need for your specific bit of code. So the trick is now to figure out, how do we get it to know my entire repository so that it has the full context of what we're working with. And there's a current limitation in the way the LLMs, which is what we're using for this, work, which is called the context window. So there's just like a hard limit on how many characters you can put into one prompt at a time. And we mitigate that, or if like AI developers mitigate that by typically by something called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. So that's basically a little search engine or something like that, which goes off first before generating a prompt. It will figure out what are the most important bits of knowledge required to answer the next question that has been posed here. And so if that is related to some file, it will maybe try and find files in the repository that are related and paste the contents of those into the prompt. or something like that. There's many ways to do it, and I don't know what either Copilot or Cursor does. It's I'm sure they have a bunch of tricks that using besides from what I just said.
Yeah, so we could say in time, perhaps, obviously we would perhaps be even better at giving it more context for our prompts, right?
I feel certain that in half a year, or at least in a year,
Yeah.
it will be a lot better at that. Cursor is already pretty good at figuring out which files to look in and find related context. And in a year, I suspect that it will not be something I'm thinking actively about. Right now, I feel like whenever I want to ask it something or have it write some code for me, I will try and think of related files and tell it either here is something you need to be aware of, or here is something you could be inspired by because I want to follow the same patterns. And I tell it, look in these files and then now go and do this. I think in a year, I won't have to be doing that particular exercise anymore.
That makes sense. So what about pair programming? Could we pair program with an AI partner? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that really is what it feels like working in something like Cursor or with GitHub Copilot or any of the other, like there's many others, obviously. It really does feel like you get to be I forget what the terms are when you pair programming. One is the driver and one is the big picture thinker, whatever. Obviously, the developer is still using the keyboard, but more and more, the AI is actually the one typing the code, and then the human is the one thinking big picture stuff. That is a little bit more how it feels now, and I suspect it will feel a lot more like that in the near future. And in the further out future, maybe the human won't be necessary at all. I'm not even joking. I really do believe that is going to happen quite soon.
Oh, let's finish off with that question.
Sure. Yeah.
And, but that's a really good question. So debugging. So sometimes we start debugging things and see if we can.
Yeah.
I don't know how often we do it, but can AI help us with that in any way?
I'm sure it can, but this is something that I have not personally used it for, at least not to any, like sometimes it sort of replaces Google and Stack Overflow and those types of services. So in a sense, you can say that is part of the debugging process as well. So you get some error message from a library that you're using and you want to figure out what does this actually mean. Asking the AI is faster than going and Googling it. So in that sense, yes, I do use it for debugging, but in its current state, at least the tools that I've tried, Cursor and Claude and so on, they're not very well suited for this type of dynamic process. Like, I think there's some that can look at the screen and like maybe observe things, but in order to debug something, I would have to go and try out something and then write in text what I see as a result, and then ask it, what do you suggest I do from here on in? And that would be a lot of typing for what is currently faster that I just do myself.
Yeah. So we have some tool support there that we might need a little more. But it could also be that we can, avoid debugging because now we can just run tests and we can find errors in another way. But who knows that?
Yeah.
So now we have to integrate to other systems. I'm a former developer, so that was often where we kind of used a lot of time with APIs, figuring out what can we call it with what kind of data and so forth. Does it help in any specific way to do that type of work?
If it's a common publicly known API, then AI is amazing. I've used it for a few different APIs that were well enough known that GPT-4o or whatever knows about it. And then it basically just does what you can basically just write a comment saying, now I want to fetch this data from the API, and it will go and it knows which parameters to put in and what the response looks like. It can make mistakes, and I guess one of the typical complaints that people have, which is very valid, is that it doesn't look like a mistake. Like it's very confident when it writes something. You can write an API request that looks like, oh, this looks completely plausible, but it actually references something that doesn't exist. That does happen. So you still need to do some checking and like manual work. It's not like has it replaced that, at least not yet. But in terms of just instead of looking things up on Google, which is what you would do a lot here, this is absolutely amazing. It's like a great time to be a developer right now in that regard.
Yeah, and how do we verify or find the errors that the AI the mistakes that they do? How do we do that? How do we find those?
Yeah, I don't have a particular process for it. It's trial and error, like it is with my own code, or like I sort of think of it as a junior developer that may also needs a bunch of guidance, who knows a lot of stuff and is very eager to look things up for me, but who may not understand, especially the way we happen to be doing things in this current code base that I'm writing on. That is like sort of the mental image that I have in my head.
Yeah. So another problem I have encountered sometimes is that, you have a large code base with a lot of legacy code. So why not give all this code to an AI and say, just refactor it and kind of make it readable and remove old code that is not really referenced anymore. So can we do that?
We can. That is, it gets more into the territory of needing the whole context. So this is something that I wouldn't say I do a lot, at least yet. But I suspect that I will be in the future. In fact, one of my friends, you know him as well, Michael Zedela, had this image that he considers the future of the developer to be more like manipulating a dough, like you're sort of what's the English word for it? Netting. You're sort of manipulating this blob of things by just pushing it in one direction. You're not modifying the individual atoms, so to speak. You're just sort of pushing things in that direction. Like, let's try convert all the files to this format. Okay, it does that, and then I don't like that after all. Let's go back, and then it just changes 100 files for you like in an instant. That may be where things are going. I don't know.
Another topic I thought about was performance optimization. Perhaps a kind of very specific task, but perhaps an AI could better kind of look into some kind of many parts of the code and see, well, this is not a good loop. This is kind of using a lot of resources. I don't know if you have tried that.
I have. The wonderful thing about AI, I think, is that, I mean, at least if things develop in a good fashion, it's actually forcing people to be more empathetic, which sounds crazy because you're talking to a machine. But so I wrote a blog post about this. This is why I have it in sort of fresh memory. But I feel that in order to be able to communicate effectively, empathy is actually what you need, because you need to be able to understand what is the knowledge that this other, not person, but entity has, and what do I need to communicate in order for them to understand what it is that I want, which is basically what empathy is, right? Or at least part of it. It's like figuring out what is their view of the world, and how can I communicate my view of the world in a way that so they will understand what I'm trying to say. So when working with AI, you're really forced to figure out, well, what is it actually I mean? What is it? How do I articulate what I'm trying to do here? And so if you're dealing with a performance issue, if you can figure out, tell it, I have a performance issue here. I suspect it is related to this, and it could be because something is re-rendering unnecessarily inside this loop. Do you spot any errors here? It can do that just as well as any other type of coding.
Perfect. Yes. Then another topic is security. So in many solutions and systems, we need to make it very secure. Can we make it even more secure with the help of AI? And
yes, we can. In the same vein that where if you think of it as this junior developer that is very eager to look things up. So you can sort of tell it, am I using the bcrypt library correctly here? And this parameter that I'm passing, is that what I should be passing here? And it will tell you, no, this is actually wrong. You should be doing this, or you should remember to check this after you make this call, or you should remember to catch exceptions or whatever. All of those things it can do. What it cannot do is similar to a junior developer, know if your sort of architecture enforces security. And security is obviously something that needs to permeate every layer of your architecture and code. Like it's just a weakest link of the chain kind of situation, right? So you need, at this point at least, still to be very vigilant of it yourself, but AI can also help.
But we're not kind of yet to give the responsibility of ensuring that we have a secure application.
No.
We still have to...
certainly not.
No.
Though I suspect, but I mean, I feel something similar with self-driving cars. I think there will be a point in time where we're going to have the opposite perspective that, oh, this is way too complicated to leave to a human. This needs to be handled by a machine. But that's not where we are right now.
No. And then the last topic, I was thinking about not just code, but all the other things that we do when we code. We design. We design classes, databases, pipelines of build tools and stuff like that. Deployment scripts and stuff like that. Any use here? What is the tool support for that, for example?
Yeah, I mean, just ChatGPT or Claude is wonderful, especially because it is such a brilliant linguist. So, like, designing systems is a lot about terminology and figuring out what are the right names here. And if you have a taxonomy, like a hierarchy of concepts, so like in nature you have that human is a mammal, is like an organism, so on. You have these hierarchies, and like what you do in object-oriented programming, but also in other things when you write code, and you can really discuss those linguistic things with ChatGPT or something like that. You can also discuss like architectural designs, like what kind of infrastructure is best suited for this. I can use this AWS service, or I can use this one, or I can use this library or these libraries, or I can use this programming language, and so on, and it will have a pretty solid input on those things.
So you also use it yourself to kind of reason about, so what is a good approach to this kind of problem or this kind of solution? Or
yeah. Like I imagine you also use ChatGPT or Claude on a daily basis, right? We've just all become accustomed to having it as like a sort of a personal assistant or an IQ enhancer. You can just bounce ideas and thoughts off of it and say, does this seem sound, or am I forgetting something? Am I overlooking something obvious here? Is this a good idea? And so on. So the only problem, but I mean, that's probably what everybody's experiencing as well. They can feel a little bit like, I suspect it must feel to be a super wealthy or a famous person that has yes men around you. Like you need to sort of work very hard to tell it, please let me know if I'm wrong, because it is very likely to just say, "You're very right about this," and then you're like, "No, I'm actually asking you, is this a good idea or not?" And sometimes it's very reluctant to ever say something that could hurt your feelings, and that is just something you need to sort of work with. But yeah, so I guess I've kind of developed some tricks to that by saying, I suspect that this could be a problem or this could be a problem, because that seems to make it more likely to say you're right. That thing you observed is actually a potential problem or something like that.
Yeah. So the prompting is important here.
Yeah.
To get it to be critical about what we give. Yeah. What the input is. Good point. So now I've got some really good answers to my question this time. So the last question we'll ask is, so what does developers do in 10 years of time? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I know that there are a lot of people who are saying that AI will never be able to replace a human, and then there are some that are saying maybe it will, but it's going to be a long time. I don't know that I think that. I guess it has slowed down a little bit, but I don't think of it as that. I just think that the innovation comes in spikes, so I don't think there's any sign of anything slowing down. And I do feel like with the way it's been evolving, in 5 years, I think it's going to be a better developer than I am, and that gives me a whole bunch of existential thoughts, like what am I going to do then? Should I be a manager instead? But who am I going to manage then? Like what is it even going to mean? And I think a lot of people had all of those existential thoughts when ChatGPT came out, because it really feels like it's not just development, right? It's every field where you're working with knowledge. And if we get sufficiently good robots, then maybe it's also all physical labor and so on. So maybe the only thing that will be left is stuff that is working with people, like dancing lessons or massaging, or I don't know. But yeah, that's certainly interesting. I think right now is an amazing time to be a developer, because this tool, it feels like it gives me superpowers. So it's so much fun. Like I'm much more happy to. So for instance, I've been writing Terraform code, which is something I normally sort of refrained from because I never really got into it and I don't really find it very interesting. But AI helps me sufficiently that I can just express what I want to do, and it can write the details for me and tell me if I'm doing something completely wrong. So from that perspective, development is great right now. I just don't know how long that window's gonna be.
So let's meet again soon, and then we can follow up on what are you doing now? Have you quit coding, or are you still writing code?
Yeah. I guess there's a chance that if it becomes so much cheaper and easier to develop software, then maybe it will just mean that the world will be able to take on much bigger projects, so that the two people in a garage doing a startup could normally do a software as a service thing. Maybe they can now make a space traveling company, or like something completely crazy that would have seemed just ridiculous back in time. But I'm not gonna try and do any predictions in that regard. There's plenty of people doing that.
Yeah.
I just have no idea. Yeah.
So let's meet again, and then we can figure out what the situation is. But
let's do that.
Yeah. So thank you for answering all my coding questions. Perhaps I'll return with more questions as we go along here, because every week we have new tools, and I saw a tool last night actually. That was a programmer. He just talked with a tool, and it created, I think, 1,600 lines of code within a few hours, and he didn't wrote any of it. So he just talked with it.
Right.
Yeah. So, but let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And thanks. Yeah. Thanks for joining us this afternoon here. And
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And to any of you that is listening here, you can join us at our last meetup this year about the AI-enabled team, where we're trying not to look just from the developer perspective, but also from the perspective of product owners, testers, Scrum Masters even. So how can we all enable these Agile roles in an Agile team? So look forward to that. And thanks for Kristian for joining here, and have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.